The splash was a sound sharp enough to slice through the murmur of the fine dining establishment, a percussive burst of liquid arrogance. A crimson spray, the color of blood and fine Cabernet, arced through the candlelit air, landing with a wet slap against the old woman's face. It dripped from her silver hair, tracing new, violent lines down the ones already carved by time and worry. It clung to her eyelashes, blurring the world into a weeping watercolor of shock and sorrow. Across the starched white tablecloth, her daughter, Chloe, stood trembling, her hands still raised, the empty wineglass a weapon now discarded. Her face was a mask of fury, her voice a shriek that turned every head, silenced every conversation. "I've sacrificed too much," she screamed, the words tearing through the opulent silence. "My entire life. For you. And you give it away? You give my house away?" The old woman, Alara, did not flinch. She did not raise a hand to wipe away the stinging insult. She simply sat there, a statue of quiet dignity being desecrated in public. A single tear escaped her eye, a clear, hot drop that mingled with the dark red stain on her cheek. She looked at her daughter, at the beautiful, enraged creature she had raised, and saw a stranger. To the gawking patrons of the Gilded Spoon, she was just another forgotten parent, a tragic sideshow in their evening of hollow pleasantries. To her daughter, she was a stubborn old woman, a foolish impediment to a comfortable future. But what none of them knew, what lay buried beneath 70 years of humility and silence, was a truth so profound it could shake the very foundations of the world they thought they understood. They saw a victim. They had no idea they were looking at a legend. Welcome to Hidden Valor, the channel that uncovers the extraordinary stories of ordinary people. We believe that true strength doesn't announce itself with trumpets, but whispers in the quiet acts of a life well lived. If you've ever felt overlooked or misunderstood, if you believe in the power of quiet dignity, then subscribe to our community and join the conversation. Today's story is about a mother's love, a daughter's rage, and a secret legacy built not of brick and mortar, but of boundless compassion. The conflict began with a single sentence over a dinner that was meant to be a celebration of sorts, or at least, that was Chloe's intention. But as the wine dripped and the silence in the restaurant grew heavy, thick with judgment and pity, the real story was just beginning to surface. The world saw a frail woman being humiliated, but a different kind of power was present at that table, an unseen force that had been dormant for decades, waiting for a moment just like this. It was the power of a promise made long ago, a promise that had shaped a life of secret sacrifice, a promise that was about to be honored, no matter the cost. And the cost, it seemed, was the very love of her only child. Alara closed her eyes for a brief moment, the scent of fermented grapes sharp in her nostrils, a bitter perfume of betrayal. She could feel the stares, the whispers, the frantic energy of the waitstaff rushing over not to her, but to placate the other diners. In that moment of public disgrace, she was utterly alone. Or so it seemed. The first threads of the great unraveling had been pulled. Alara's world was a universe contained within the four walls of a small, post-war bungalow on a street where all the other houses had been torn down and replaced with sterile, oversized McMansions. Hers was the last holdout, a gentle rebuke to the relentless march of modernity. The paint on the clapboard was peeling in long, elegant strips, like sunburnt skin. The garden was a chaotic but beautiful tangle of wildflowers and heirloom vegetables, not the manicured, chemically treated lawns of her neighbors. Inside, the house smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and rain. Every piece of furniture told a story of repair. A fine crack in a wooden chair leg was sealed with golden-hued resin, a Japanese kintsugi technique she'd read about, celebrating the beauty of imperfection. The floral sofa, faded from decades of sunlight, had patches sewn on with impossibly neat stitches, the new fabric a slightly brighter shade than the old, creating a mosaic of its own history. Her life was a study in quiet routine, a liturgy of simple acts. She woke with the sun, not because of an alarm, but because her internal clock was set to the rhythm of the birds outside her window. She would drink her tea from a thick, chipped ceramic mug while reading poetry, her lips moving silently, tasting the words. Her days were spent in the garden, her hands, wrinkled and earth-stained, coaxing life from the soil. She volunteered 3 days a week at the local library, not shelving books, but in a small, forgotten room in the basement, mending them. With delicate precision, she would repair torn pages with translucent paper, reglue cracked spines, and erase the careless marks of long-dead readers. She saw it as her duty to preserve the stories. Her neighbors saw her as a sweet, slightly eccentric widow. They would wave as she walked past, this small woman in a simple cotton dress and sturdy shoes, her silver hair always pulled back in a neat bun. They knew her only as Mrs. Vance, the quiet woman from the old house. They didn't know the fierce intelligence behind her calm blue eyes, or the weight of the secrets she carried as lightly as the basket of tomatoes she sometimes left on their doorsteps. A key to her world, if anyone had cared to look, was the locket she always wore. It was not gold or silver, but a simple, dark metal, worn smooth by the touch of her fingers over countless years. It had no visible clasp, and she was never seen opening it. It rested in the hollow of her throat, a silent, constant companion. It was a focal point of her stillness, her hand often rising to touch it when she was deep in thought. It was a totem of her past, a physical manifestation of the promise she carried within her. Chloe, however, saw none of this beauty or depth. She saw only decay. She saw a mother who had given up. After her father, a kind and successful engineer, had passed away a decade ago, Chloe had expected her mother to sell the house, travel, enjoy the considerable inheritance he had left. Instead, Alara had withdrawn deeper into her simple life. Her frugality, which had once seemed sensible, now struck Chloe as a pathological miserliness. Why mend a 50-year-old sofa when you could afford a new one? Why grow your own food when you could have it delivered? Why live in a crumbling old house in a neighborhood that had become a playground for the newly rich? To Chloe, her mother's life was a constant, nagging embarrassment, a testament to a profound lack of ambition. She didn't see the repaired chair as beautiful, she saw it as a sign of poverty, either real or performative. She didn't smell old books, she smelled dust and mold. She saw a woman who was a ghost in her own life, and a gatekeeper to the real estate windfall that Chloe felt was her birthright. The house was not a home to her, it was an asset, a multi-million-dollar asset, frozen in time by her mother's inexplicable sentimentality. She fundamentally misunderstood the currency her mother dealt in. Alara's wealth wasn't measured in bank statements, but in the number of books she had saved, the number of seeds she had nurtured, the quiet, unseen ripples of kindness she sent out into the world from the sanctuary of her small, unassuming home. Chloe's world, in stark contrast, was a fortress of polished glass and brushed steel. She lived 40 floors up in a downtown condo where the windows looked out over a sprawling cityscape that glittered like a field of scattered diamonds at night. Her home was curated, not lived in. The furniture was minimalist, uncomfortable, and excruciatingly expensive. There were no books, only art magazines laid out on a glass coffee table at perfect right angles. The air smelled of nothing, scrubbed clean by a state-of-the-art filtration system. Her life was a relentless pursuit of more. A better job title, a faster car, a more exclusive vacation, a more influential circle of friends. She worked as a senior vice president of marketing for a large corporation, a job that paid handsomely but demanded her soul in return. She spent her days in back-to-back meetings, speaking a language of synergies, deliverables, and leveraging assets. She was successful, admired, and deeply, profoundly unhappy, though she would never admit it. Her concept of sacrifice was a bitter joke, a perversion of the word's true meaning. To Chloe, sacrifice was flying business class instead of first. It was having to postpone the renovation of her second bathroom because the market was down. It was the emotional labor of having to listen to a friend's problems. She often complained to her friends, over $100 cocktails, about how much she had given up for her family, a statement of such breathtaking delusion that even her equally self-absorbed friends found it hard to swallow. Her father's death had, for her, been a tragedy primarily in the financial sense. It meant the family assets were now tied up with her difficult mother. She had received a generous trust fund which she had long since spent on her condo, her car, and her lifestyle, but she saw the family home as the final, grand prize. It was her redemption, the key that would unlock the next level of luxury she so desperately craved. She dreamed of selling it, of the glorious, unencumbered cash that would flow into her accounts. With it, she could quit her job, travel the world in luxury, and finally be free. Her mother was the only obstacle. Chloe's visits to the bungalow on the old street were exercises in barely concealed impatience. She would walk through the rooms, her expensive heels clicking on the worn hardwood floors, her eyes scanning everything with a realtor's cold appraisal. "Mother, this wiring is a fire hazard," she'd say, ignoring the warm glow of the antique lamp. "You have to deal with the asbestos in the ceiling," she'd press, gesturing at the beautiful, patterned tin tiles. "Think of the property taxes." Each visit was a campaign, a slow, grinding effort to wear her mother down. She'd bring brochures for luxury retirement communities, painting pictures of social activities, gourmet meals, and on-call medical staff. "You wouldn't have to lift a finger, Mom. You deserve to be pampered." But Alara would just smile her quiet smile, touch the locket at her throat, and change the subject. Chloe interpreted this not as polite refusal, but as senile stubbornness. She began to build a narrative in her mind, a story she told herself and her friends. Her mother was losing her grip, she wasn't capable of making sound financial decisions. She was a damsel in distress who didn't know she needed rescuing, and Chloe, the long-suffering daughter, was the only one brave enough to be the hero. This self-serving delusion was the armor she wore, protecting her from the ugly truth of her own greed. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that she was acting out of love and concern. The dinner at the Gilded Spoon was her final, grand maneuver. She would take her mother out of her dusty, depressing environment, show her a glimpse of the good life, and make her see reason. It was an ambush disguised as a treat, a hostile takeover couched in the language of filial care. The dinner at the Gilded Spoon was doomed from the start. Chloe had chosen the restaurant for its intimidating opulence, believing the sheer weight of its grandeur would make her mother feel small and her own arguments feel more significant. The chandeliers dripped with crystals, the waiters moved with the silent, predatory grace of sharks, and the prices on the menu were astronomical. Alara looked out of place in her simple, homemade dress, a small, gray sparrow in a flock of peacocks. She seemed unbothered, however, her gaze fixed not on the lavish decor, but on a small vase on the table holding a single, perfect white rose. Chloe launched her attack after the appetizers, her voice smooth and practiced, the same tone she used to sell multi-million-dollar marketing campaigns. "Mother," she began, reaching across the table to pat Alara's hand, a gesture that felt both condescending and possessive. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. And I'm worried about you, all alone in that big, old house." Alara simply listened, her expression unreadable. "It's a lot to maintain," Chloe continued, warming to her theme. "The roof needs work, the plumbing is ancient. It's not safe. I've found the most wonderful place for you. It's called the Willow Creek Estates. It's more like a resort than a retirement home. They have a pool, a cinema, art classes. She slid a glossy brochure across the table. Alara didn't look at it. She met Chloe's gaze, her blue eyes clear and steady. The house is fine, Chloe. It has served me well. The polite, but firm, dismissal was not what Chloe expected. Her smile tightened. Be realistic, Mother. It's falling apart. And more importantly, it's an investment. It's worth a fortune. That's Dad's legacy. He wanted us to be secure. Your father left you very secure, Alara said softly. As he did me. The trust is gone. Life is expensive. Chloe's voice was rising now, attracting the first curious glances from nearby tables. That house is our future. My future. Alara took a slow sip of water. She placed the glass down with deliberate care. Then she looked at her daughter, a deep sadness in her eyes. The house isn't being sold, Chloe, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable finality. I've already made arrangements. Chloe stared, baffled. Arrangements? What arrangements? Are you selling it to someone else? Did you get an offer? You should have consulted me. Alara shook her head slowly. It's going to charity. I'm donating it. The words hung in the air between them, more shocking than a physical blow. Chloe's face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, disbelief, a flicker of fear, and then a tidal wave of pure, incandescent rage. Charity? She hissed, the word dripping with venom. What charity? You don't know anything about charity. You're being scammed. Some predatory organization has gotten its hooks into you, haven't they? It is my decision, Alara stated, her voice still quiet, but now edged with a steel that Chloe had never heard before. The house has served its purpose. Now it will serve a new one. That was when Chloe snapped. The carefully constructed facade of the caring daughter crumbled into dust, revealing the raw, grasping greed beneath. Its purpose? She shrieked, her voice cracking. Its purpose is to be my inheritance. The one thing Dad left for me. The one thing I have counted on. She was on her feet now, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. How could you do this to me? After everything I've done. After all my sacrifices. The word sacrifices was the tipping point. It was so grotesquely untrue, so utterly offensive to the quiet, hidden life of service Alara had led, that for a moment, the old woman's composure almost broke. But before she could speak, Chloe grabbed her wine glass. The world seemed to slow down. Alara saw the dark liquid tilt, saw the fury in her daughter's eyes, saw the decision made and executed in a single, fluid motion. Then came the splash, the cold shock, the collective gasp of the entire restaurant. And the scream. I've sacrificed too much. A declaration of war against a lifetime of peace. Alara sat there, dripping, shamed, yet in her heart, a strange calm settled. The secret she had kept for 50 years was no longer just hers to protect. The world had now intervened. In the days that followed the disastrous dinner, Chloe's rage did not subside, it metastasized. Humiliation curdled into a cold, calculated fury. She had been publicly thwarted, her inheritance threatened by what she could only describe as late-life insanity. She immediately escalated her campaign from one of persuasion to one of open warfare. Her first call was to a high-powered law firm, one known for its aggressive tactics in estate litigation. She was assigned a senior partner, a slick, silver-haired man named Marcus Thorne, and a junior associate, a young, earnest woman named Maya Singh. In the initial consultation, Chloe painted a masterful, tragic portrait of the situation. "My mother, Alara," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, "is a wonderful woman, but she's not herself anymore. She's vulnerable. She lives in total seclusion. She's talking about giving our family home, worth millions, to some charity I've never heard of. I'm terrified she's being manipulated." Thorne nodded sympathetically, already seeing the billable hours adding up. He spoke of legal avenues, challenging competency, establishing a conservatorship, power of attorney. "We'll protect your mother, and your family's assets," he said, the two clauses given equal weight. Maya, the young associate, took notes diligently. It seemed like a straightforward, if sad, case of elder financial abuse. It was her job to handle the initial fact-finding, to meet with Alara and assess the situation on the ground. She arrived at the small bungalow a few days later, expecting to find a scene of squalor and confusion, a doddery old woman who could be easily led. What she found instead was Alara, calmly weeding her garden. Alara greeted her with a quiet politeness that was disarming. She invited Maya inside for a cup of tea. The house, far from being the decrepit mess Chloe had described, was meticulously clean and orderly. It was old, yes, but it was cared for with a palpable love. There was no confusion in Alara's eyes, only a sharp, weary intelligence. "Chloe sent you," Alara stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Yes, Mrs. Vance," Maya said, feeling strangely like an intruder. "We're just concerned for your well-being." Alara looked at her over the rim of her teacup. "My well-being is my own affair. As is my house." During their brief, stilted conversation, Maya's eyes were drawn to the dark metal locket around Alara's neck. It seemed an odd piece of jewelry for such a simple woman, possessing a gravity that was at odds with her cotton dress. She saw Alara's hand go to it unconsciously, a gesture of reassurance. Maya left the house feeling deeply unsettled. The woman she had just met bore no resemblance to the victim Chloe had portrayed. There was a strength in Alara, a serene self-possession that Maya couldn't reconcile with the idea of her being a pawn in some charity scheme. Meanwhile, Chloe was on the phone, systematically poisoning the well. She called relatives, old family friends, anyone who would listen, spinning her tale of a mother lost to dementia and predatory grifters. "We have to do something before she gives everything away," she'd plead, her voice a cocktail of panic and righteousness. The narrative began to take hold. People who hadn't seen Alara in years clucked with sympathy for poor, burdened Chloe. The disrespect escalated. Legal notices began to arrive at the bungalow, cold, formal documents filled with threatening jargon. Chloe started driving by the house several times a day, monitoring her mother as if she were a flight risk. One afternoon, Maya returned to the house to deliver another legal document in person, a task she felt increasingly uncomfortable with. She found Alara on her knees by a particular rose bush near the front porch. It was a scrawny, gnarled thing, with only a few tenacious leaves and one pale, fragile-looking bloom. It looked ancient. "That one's a fighter," Maya said, trying to make small talk. Alara looked up, her gaze distant. "It was the first one," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It reminds me to keep going." The words were simple, yet they landed with a strange weight. The first what? What did it remind her to keep going with? Maya handed over the envelope. Alara took it without looking at it and placed it on the porch railing. She didn't seem angry or scared, just resolute. As Maya walked back to her car, she felt a profound shift in her own perspective. This wasn't a case of a confused old woman. This was something else entirely. She was an observer to a conflict where one side was screaming and the other was tending to a rose bush. She was beginning to suspect which side held the real power. Maya Singh was a good lawyer, which meant she was thorough. The doubt that had been planted during her first visit to Alara's bungalow had taken root and was beginning to grow into a thicket of professional curiosity. The official story, as presented by her client Chloe and her boss Marcus Thorne, was simple. A wealthy widow with declining mental faculties was being targeted by a charity. But the evidence of her own eyes and ears contradicted this. Alara Vance was not confused, she was composed. She was not weak, she possessed a formidable, if quiet, strength. Back at the office, Maya began to dig. She started with the charity Alara had named, the Sparrow's Nest Foundation. Her initial search brought up a website for a massive, global NGO. They ran shelters, food banks, scholarship programs, and disaster relief operations on 3 continents. Their annual budget was in the hundreds of millions. They were a philanthropic titan, with a board of directors composed of respected international figures and a reputation for unimpeachable integrity. The idea that this behemoth organization was actively scamming a single widow out of her modest bungalow seemed absurd. It would be like an elephant trying to steal a peanut from an ant. She presented her findings to Marcus Thorne. "It's an incredibly reputable organization, Marcus," she said, laying out the foundation's annual report on his desk. "Their financials are transparent. They're a gold standard nonprofit. It doesn't make sense that they would be involved in a coercive property transfer." Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be naive, Maya. The bigger they are, the more departments they have. It's probably some low-level fundraising drone who got overzealous, promised his bosses a big score. Or maybe the old lady just got obsessed with them and is acting unilaterally. It doesn't change our case. The house is a family asset, and our client's mother is not in a fit state to dispose of it." But Maya wasn't convinced. The official story felt like a poorly written play. There was a piece missing, a central character who hadn't yet taken the stage. She decided to go deeper, beyond the glossy website and the official reports. She started digging into the foundation's history, using the firm's access to deep archival databases. She searched for the foundation's origins, looking for articles, press releases, or legal documents from its inception decades ago. The Sparrow's Nest had been founded nearly 50 years prior. It started small, as a local outreach program in this very city, providing meals and a safe place to sleep for the homeless. The founder was listed in all the early documentation as simply Sparrow, a mysterious, anonymous benefactor who had provided the initial seed money and vision. The media at the time had been fascinated by this Sparrow, but their identity was a closely guarded secret. The foundation grew organically, its good work attracting more donations, more volunteers, expanding from a local initiative to a national, and then international, force for good. But the founder's identity was never revealed. Sparrow had remained a ghost, a symbol of selfless giving. Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. A quiet benefactor. A secret. A life of unassuming service. It was all starting to coalesce around the image of Alara Vance, on her knees, tending to a single, ancient rose bush. Could it be possible? It seemed too much like a fairy tale, too fantastic to be real. She searched for any connection, any link between Alara Vance and the foundation. Nothing. She searched for her late husband, Robert Vance. He was an engineer, successful, but there was no record of any major philanthropic activity in his name other than standard community donations. The trail was cold. Frustrated, Maya decided to visit Alara one more time, not as a lawyer, but just as a person. She brought a small pot of lavender as a peace offering. She found Alara on the porch, reading. They spoke for a while, about the weather, about the changing neighborhood, about the book Alara was reading. The legal notices sat in an unopened pile on a small table. During a lull in the conversation, Maya gestured towards the locket. "That's a beautiful piece," she said gently. "It looks very old." Alara's hand went to it, the familiar, protective gesture. She smiled, a faint, sad smile. "It holds a promise," she said, and offered no more. "A promise." A secret benefactor named Sparrow. A house that needed to serve a new purpose. A rose bush planted as a reminder. Maya felt the tumblers of a great lock clicking into place in her mind. She didn't have proof, not yet. But she had a theory, a wild, improbable theory that made more sense than anything her client or her boss had told her. She was no longer just an observer. She was a witness on the verge of a profound discovery. The day of the competency hearing arrived, a gray, overcast morning that matched the grim proceedings. Chloe was dressed in a severe, dark business suit, an outfit chosen to project an image of sober responsibility. She stood on the porch of her mother's bungalow, flanked by her senior lawyer, Marcus Thorne. They were waiting for a court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist to arrive and conduct an evaluation of Alara, an evaluation Chloe was certain would prove her case. She felt a grim sense of triumph. It was a distasteful business, but a necessary one. Soon, this would all be over. The house would be secured, and she could get on with her life. Alara was inside, sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, the one with the mended arm. She was calm, her hands resting in her lap. She had refused to be coached by the legal aid lawyer Maya had insisted she contact. "The truth does not need a script," Alara had said. Maya stood a little ways off, by the gate, caught between her professional duty to her firm and her growing personal conviction that a great injustice was about to be committed. She watched as a plain white van, unmarked and unassuming, pulled up to the curb. It was not the psychiatrist's sedan they were expecting. The side door slid open and a man in his late 60s stepped out. He was tall and lean, with a kind, intelligent face and silver hair. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit, but he carried himself with an air of quiet, unassailable authority. He was followed by two other people, a man and a woman, both younger, dressed in professional but understated attire. They moved with a synchronized, respectful purpose, their eyes taking in the small, peeling house not with disdain, but with a kind of reverence. Chloe and Thorne watched their approach with suspicion. "Can I help you?" Thorne asked, his voice sharp and proprietary. He assumed they were more charity workers, drawn by the scent of a potential bequest. The older man stopped at the foot of the porch steps. His gaze went past them, to the front door, as if he were looking at a sacred place. "My name is David Harrison," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I am here to see Alara." He used her first name with a familiar sort of respect that immediately set Chloe on edge. The name David Harrison rang a distant bell in Thorne's mind, but he couldn't immediately place it. "Mrs. Vance is preparing for an important legal appointment," Thorne said dismissively. "She is not receiving visitors. If you are from the Foundation, you can direct your inquiries to me." Harrison's gaze finally settled on Thorn, and for the first time, Maya saw a flicker of something other than gentle respect in his eyes. It was a cool, appraising look that seemed to see right through the lawyer's expensive suit and arrogant demeanor. "I am the CEO of the Sparrow's Nest Foundation," Harrison said, the words delivered without an ounce of pride, as a simple statement of fact. Thorn's jaw tightened. The CEO himself. This complicated things. "Well, Mr. Harrison," he said, recovering quickly. "As I am sure you can appreciate, our client's mother is the subject of a competency hearing precisely because of her intention to donate this property. Your presence here is highly inappropriate." Harrison simply shook his head, a small, sad gesture. "You misunderstand," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. "I am not here to influence her. I am here to ensure that her wishes are honored, and to be present for the final transfer of this property, a property which, I assure you, is far more significant than you can possibly imagine." He took a step up onto the porch, his presence suddenly immense, commanding the space. His two associates remained at the bottom of the steps, like sentinels. The power dynamic on the porch had irrevocably shifted. The air crackled with a new tension. Chloe, who had been watching with smug confidence, now felt a prickle of unease. This was not the bumbling, low-level drone she had imagined. This was a man of power and substance, and he was looking at her mother's house as if it were a cathedral. The psychiatrist's car pulled up then, but no one noticed. All eyes were on the confrontation brewing on the porch of the little bungalow that was at the center of everything. "Significant?" Marcus Thorne scoffed, regaining his professional bluster. He saw Harrison not as a threat, but as a final, dramatic obstacle to be dismantled in front of the soon-to-be-arriving psychiatrist. "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, it's a 3-bedroom bungalow in a gentrifying neighborhood. It's significant as a real estate asset, certainly. But let's not get carried away with hyperbole." David Harrison turned his full attention to the lawyer. He looked at Thorne, then at the bewildered Chloe, and finally at Maya, who was watching, breathless, from the gate. He seemed to be making a decision, a choice to break a long-held silence. He let out a soft sigh. "You see a house," he began, his voice taking on a new timbre, a storyteller's cadence that was both intimate and commanding. "I see a historical landmark. You see peeling paint and an old roof. I see the birthplace of a global movement. You see a real estate asset. I see Genesis." He took a step closer to the front door, reaching out to touch the worn wood with a reverence that was utterly genuine. Nearly 50 years ago, a young woman was recently widowed. Her husband, a good man, left her with a modest but respectable life insurance policy and some investments. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of her days. She had a young daughter to raise. Most people, in her position, would have focused on their own security, on preserving that capital for their child's future. He paused, his eyes sweeping over Chloe, who flinched as if struck. But this woman was different. She saw the suffering in her city. People without homes, children without food, families broken by poverty. And she made a promise to herself, and to God, that she would not rest while others suffered. So, from her kitchen table, in this very house, she started a foundation. She gave it a name that reflected her own sense of smallness and humility in the face of such a large task, the Sparrow's Nest. Maya's heart was pounding in her chest. Her wild theory was real. Thorne's smug expression began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She was its first and only employee, Harrison continued, his voice resonating with emotion. She was the bookkeeper, the grant writer, the delivery driver, and the entire board of directors. She channeled almost every penny of her husband's legacy into her work, keeping only the barest minimum to survive, to raise her daughter in this house without the child ever knowing the Spartan reality of their finances. The world knew her only as Sparrow, the anonymous, miraculous benefactor who seemed to be everywhere at once. She would use the foundation's money to buy food, and then deliver it herself in the middle of the night from the trunk of her old, beat-up car, so no one would know who she was. He turned and pointed to the gnarled, ancient rose bush by the porch. She planted that bush the day the foundation was able to afford its first rented room, a single room that housed a homeless mother and her infant child. It was a symbol. A promise that something beautiful could grow from almost nothing, with enough care and determination. He looked directly at Chloe, whose face had gone deathly pale. You scream about your sacrifices. Do you know what real sacrifice is? It's your mother mending her own clothes so a child she'd never meet could have a new coat. It's her eating potato soup for a week so a dozen families could have a hot meal. It's her staying up all night, year after year, fighting for funding, for permits, for dignity for the forgotten, while you slept soundly in your bed, dreaming of the inheritance she was giving away, piece by piece, to save the world. He gestured to his associate, who stepped forward and opened a leather briefcase. She produced a single, yellowed document, preserved in archival plastic. This is the original corporate charter for the Sparrow's Nest Foundation. It was filed 50 years ago. He took it and held it out. And here, at the bottom, is the signature of the founder, the woman known as Sparrow. He turned it for all to see. There, in elegant, slightly faded ink, was the name Alara Vance. On-screen text began to flash, a cascade of overwhelming truth: number of shelters built, 8,412, annual meals served, 31.5 million, scholarships funded, 122,000, disaster relief operations, 214, countries served, 27, founder, Alara Vance. Code name, Sparrow. Harrison then reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small, dark metal object. It was a locket, identical to the one around Alara's neck. Every senior member of our board carries one of these, he said softly. A reminder of our founder, and of our mission. The truth, in its full, staggering weight, had finally been revealed. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the porch. It was a silence so heavy it felt like a physical presence, pressing down on them, crushing the air from their lungs. The only sound was the distant city traffic, a world away from the earth-shattering revelation that had just occurred. Marcus Thorne, the slick, confident litigator, stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. His legal arguments, his strategies, his entire case, had been built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in, washing it all away into nothingness. He stared at the yellowed charter in Harrison's hand, then at the serene, powerful face of the CEO, and finally at the small, quiet woman who was now visible through the screen door, standing in the shadows of her living room. He saw not a confused old woman, but a giant, a titan of philanthropy who had hidden herself in plain sight. He was utterly, completely, and professionally annihilated. Chloe was a statue carved from shame. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her skin a waxy, mottled white. Her eyes, wide with horror, were fixed on her mother. Her entire life, her entire sense of self and victimhood, was a lie she had told herself. The narrative of her mother's neglect, of her own sacrifices, of her entitlement to the house, it all crumbled into dust, revealing the ugly, grasping greed at its core. She saw her life's ambition for what it was, a petty, pathetic scramble for money, while her mother had been quietly and single-handedly changing the world. The wine she had thrown, the insults she had hurled, the legal war she had waged, each memory was now a fresh stab of unbearable shame. She tried to speak, to form an apology, a denial, anything, but her throat was constricted, her tongue a leaden weight in her mouth. The sound that escaped was a dry, choked sob. Maya, standing by the gate, felt tears streaming down her own face. They were tears of awe, of reverence, of a deep, emotional release. She was witnessing the vindication of a truly great soul. Every instinct she had, every doubt about the case, had been validated in the most spectacular way imaginable. She looked at Alara, who had now stepped out onto the porch, her quiet dignity a shield against the emotional storm raging around her. Alara's honor was restored, not by a judge or a jury, but by the simple, unadorned truth. She did not look triumphant. There was no "I told you so" in her eyes. As she looked at her weeping, broken daughter, her expression was one of immense, heartbreaking sorrow. She walked past the stunned lawyers and the deferential CEO and stood before Chloe. She reached out, not in anger, but with a gentle hand, and wiped a tear from her daughter's cheek. "I always knew the house had one last purpose to serve," Alara said, her voice soft and steady, carrying no trace of bitterness. "To teach one final lesson." With that, she turned and walked back into her home, the screen door clicking softly shut behind her, leaving Chloe to drown in the silence. Mr. Harrison nodded to his team. They began their work with quiet efficiency, not as developers or demolition experts, but as archivists. They took photographs of the mended chair, the worn floorboards, the simple kitchen table where it all began. They treated every object in the house as a sacred relic. The court-appointed psychiatrist, who had been watching from his car, simply put the vehicle in reverse and drove away, understanding that his services would not be needed. Chloe finally crumpled, sinking to her knees on the porch steps, her hands covering her face as decades of ignorance and selfishness came crashing down upon her. The house would be donated. Her mother's legacy was secure. And Chloe was left with nothing but the bitter taste of her own profound and devastating failure as a daughter, and as a human being. The days that followed were a blur of quiet transition. The legal challenges vanished as if they had never existed. Marcus Thorne and his firm withdrew, issuing a formal, if hollow, apology. Chloe disappeared, retreating into the sterile silence of her high-rise apartment, refusing to answer calls or see anyone. She was left alone with the ghost of her own avarice, a specter that would haunt her for the rest of her days. The Sparrow's Nest Foundation acted with the gentle precision for which it was known. They arranged for Alara to move into a lovely, light-filled apartment in a quiet building overlooking a park, a building owned and maintained by the foundation for its long-serving staff and beneficiaries. It was simple, comfortable, and filled with books. It was everything she needed. Alara herself remained unchanged by the dramatic upheaval. Her vindication was not a victory to be celebrated, but a simple fact that had finally been brought into the light. She packed her few belongings into a handful of cardboard boxes, her clothes, her poetry books, her chipped ceramic mug, and a small, carefully wrapped bundle containing cuttings from the old rose bush. She sought no apology from Chloe. She made no grand speeches. Her humility was not a performance, it was the very core of her being. On the final day, as she was preparing to leave the bungalow for the last time, Maya came to visit. She didn't come as a lawyer, but as an admirer. She brought Alara a new book of poetry. "I just wanted to say," Maya began, her voice thick with emotion, "thank you for everything you've done. That you've secretly done. Alara smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. She took Maya's hand. "Kindness is its own reward, my dear," she said. "It asks for nothing in return." Before she left, Alara placed one small object on the mantelpiece of the now empty living room, a room that would soon become a museum, a place of inspiration. It was a single, framed photograph of her late husband, the kind engineer whose quiet legacy had provided the seed from which a forest of hope had grown. She left it there for him to watch over their house as it began its new life. Her resolution was not in reclaiming a relationship with her daughter, for that was a wound that only time and a profound change of heart in Chloe could ever hope to heal. Her resolution was in the quiet, peaceful continuation of her life's purpose. She had built her legacy not for applause or for recognition, but for the simple, profound good of it. And in the end, she remained true to that principle. She left her old life as quietly as she had lived it, a sparrow taking flight, leaving behind a nest that would shelter generations to come. The narrator's voice returns, filled with a quiet reverence. We see a final montage, Alara, sitting on her new balcony, reading, a cup of tea in her hands, a small pot with a budding rose cutting beside her. We see the bungalow, now with a simple, elegant bronze plaque next to the door. It reads, "The Sparrow's Nest." Where it all began. Founded by Alara Sparrow Vance. The story reminds us that the greatest heroes are often the ones we never see. They don't wear capes or seek headlines. They live among us, hiding their immense strength behind a veil of humility, their greatness measured not in what they accumulate for themselves, but in what they give to others. They are the menders of broken things, the tenders of gardens, the silent architects of a better world. True legacy is not an inheritance passed down, but a light passed on. What does it mean to live a rich life? Is it to be surrounded by possessions, or to be defined by your purpose? What is the true measure of a person's worth? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of hidden valor and the importance of recognizing the quiet heroes all around us, please subscribe to our channel and share this story. You never know who might need to hear it.